Gonzalez reports now on how students are learning about the publishing business.
The kids at PS 183 on Manhattan's Upper East Side are heavy into reading. But like these sixth graders, the books they're reading might well have been written and published by them or their classmates.
When I was in sixth grade, I was going to Robert Louis Stevenson School, aka PS 183, on 66 between 1st and York. My teacher was Mrs. Davis, a glamorous, tall woman with dark hair, red lipstick, and high heels, who was so nice and so creative. She gave us an assignment to make our own storybooks for children. And then Channel 2 News came to our classroom and covered the story.
The kids went through the whole process of writing a book, the writing, the rewriting, the editing, and in the long run, there were even surprises for the teacher.
I thought the quality was wonderful. I thought their ability to proofread and to revise and to edit their work and to seek perfection was wonderful, and their illustrations just blew me away.
The mountains are tall, even taller than China's Great Wall.
We were to put it together from scratch. My book was about a boy who wanted to be anywhere but where he was. He wanted to escape into his imagination. It starts off where he looks out the window. It's nighttime, and it's time to go to sleep. He looks out the window at the stars and wishes that he was out there instead. And then he finds himself on a magic carpet, flying through the sky. And at that time, in the 80s, the world seemed so harsh that the better alternative seemed to be to escape into another world, like the character in the children's book.
Here at home, the dramatic hearings concerning a child with AIDS attending school in Queens continue.
Ryan White was 13 years old when I met him. Parents feared he would give their children AIDS.
Death is all around. A child or an adult dies every 20 minutes. The relief agencies do what they can. 1 in 3 is severely malnourished.
There was this real fear and sadness that was like a dark cloud all around us. It seemed there was no hope, no matter what people were doing, any protests were on the streets, any money that was raised. Then my mother got hit by a car and almost died on June 16th, 1989. We had gotten a phone call from a neighbor that saw a woman get hit by a car outside their window, and she looked like my mother. It was rainy and dark out, so it wasn't clear. My father and I ran down the streets, a couple of blocks away, to the emergency room at New York Hospital. I waited in the nurse's office while my father went to identify their Jane Doe. But while I was waiting, I saw a large Ziploc baggie that clearly had my mother's bloody clothes in it, and I just screamed because I knew it was her. I started reading my old journals, reading through decades of emotions, revisiting things I had forgotten. I had always been writing in a diary since I was a little girl. My grandma Sheila gave me my first diary when I was 8 years old. I got to see my handwriting, the way my little mind was thinking, what I was observing and understanding. When I went back to school at Hunter to take film and media courses, I took script analysis and creative writing classes and started to really explore and become more confident. I had professors that were very encouraging of my style. It was the first time that I took my poetry and little vignettes and pieced them together to create a story. There was nothing depressing about it, even recounting heartbreaking events, because it was turning it into something new. My writing process hasn't changed too much over the years. It is, like with other things that I do, an exploration of experience, emotions. When I was writing, it felt very much like writing out a dream. In the darkness, he loved to lay in bed and listen to her footsteps on the other side of the door. She was always so busy, walking around. She seemed to move in circles throughout the house. The sound of her shoes on the wooden floor was soothing to him, like drum beats, like raindrops, like the crackling from a record player. And just as he was finding a rhythm within the footsteps, they would disappear. He'd wait a few minutes to be sure they wouldn't pick up again, and then he'd get out of bed and look for her. This concept is a similar process for me when I'm putting together a documentary script. It's very much about tapping into the vulnerable places within myself so that I can connect with others on that level as well. This is another connection between my own creative writing for fiction and my non-fiction writing for documentary or biography films.
And later, as he got older, and he kept on wanting children, we tried to adopt. We couldn't qualify to adopt. You had to have a guaranteed income. We didn't have. Both of you had to pass a physical. He couldn't pass the physical. You had to have a permanent home. We didn't have.
It sounds really sad.
Yeah.
In the case of Jen's father, in the brainwashing of my dad, it was very much about Jen herself. That was a big part of putting together the script with her and Mel, to develop this intimate, shadowy, almost subconscious or reflective feel to her moments in the film. It wasn't only about the history of the media, but also to punctuate the film with her personal relationship with her father. In each documentary film, it's about tapping into the individual within the film. With the real Anthony Fauci, it was so much about Bobby Kennedy and his experience with the whole industry and the captured agencies of our country, including his family background and his environmental advocacy work. And then each other character in the film, from the book, whether they had ever met Bobby in person or not, had their lives and careers interwoven with his. I realized that Dr. Merrick, who was quite outspoken during COVID, I realized that he started his career in South Africa and cared for AIDS patients, as well as Bobby Kennedy's experience with Africa, meeting and speaking to leaders there and going there with his family and witnessing for himself the devastation of sickness and poverty. And I added a lot of Thabo Mbeki to the script, president of South Africa at that time, and was quite a prominent voice as he looked for the truth behind the AIDS epidemic in Africa. The AIDS portion of the documentary was one of the most deeply profound parts of it for me personally, because the AIDS epidemic and the pervasive fear and horror that surrounded it in the early days was part of my childhood growing up in New York.
Here at home, the dramatic hearings concerning a child with AIDS.
New York was one of the first places that it became so widespread, and also becoming aware of the deep pain and anguish that the people of Africa were going through at that time in the 80s and 90s really colored the way that I saw the world as a child and into adulthood. I was reading a book written by a trauma victim who had endured decades of abuse and was unable to escape because severe mind manipulation had taken place. She was eventually rescued by a man who wore many hats in the CIA, which included researching mind sciences. And so he knew well the tactics and techniques of mind manipulation over individuals and the masses. And he also knew the tactics and techniques on how to undo it, how to heal from it. He taught her how to heal herself He gave her the tools and encouraged her to empower herself. He let her own brain access the answers. One of the techniques that he taught her was the power of writing, the act of putting pen to paper, to write out almost stream of consciousness with no filter and exercising and accessing that part of the brain. Perhaps the greatest challenge in writing is to tap into that part of us that is beneath all of the layers of fear and armor that we have been taught to shield ourselves with in order to navigate the world.